Welcome everyone to our computational social science seminar at CUHK. And I'm very privileged to have Professor Pan here. Professor Pan is currently assistant professor at Chinese University of Hong Kong at Shenzhen campus. And I was inspired by her work a couple of years ago. So I've been keeping track of her work, and let me give a brief introduction of her background. She got her bachelor's degree in economics and psychology from Peking University, and I think 2 years ago she graduated from University of Maryland in psychology, and her work is very interesting. And the reason we invite her here is because she applied a very innovative usage of agent-based modeling, which is a computational method many social scientists may not be aware of or use, but she applied it to the understanding of dynamics in cultural norm formation and maintenance, such as gossip, why people gossip, and this seems like a mundane topic, but it has very fundamental basis of our social behavior, right? So people gossip, and she tries to use agent-based modeling to uncover the underlying mechanism and the motivation for gossiping. And she also has very outstanding publication record. Her work has appeared in PNAS and American Psychologist, which are very top publications, and hopefully she will share her work and her publication experiences with our audience and students here, so we can all learn how to promote computational methods in social science research. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Pan.
Thank you so much for the very kind introduction from Dr. Chiu, and thank you for having me. It's a great honor to be here. And Dr. Chiu asked me to talk about gossip, and that's why I'm here. So the title of my presentation today is The Evolutionary Cycle of Gossip. And I believe we all gossip. And so gossip, in the definition that I chose for this work, is the exchange of personal information given in an evaluative way about absent third parties. And I believe we all gossip. And the history of gossip is just as long as humanity. So as early as in the literature in ancient Greece, you already see the recording of many stories about gossip, such as in Aesop's fables and in Homer. So there are many stories about some person gossip about the wife of another person, stories like that. And from hunter-gatherer groups to modern universities and community groups, people spend a substantial time in their daily life gossiping. So this is the proportion of time they're spending on talking about others. And there was another amazing study. So the researchers, they recorded the daily conversation of people, and they came to a conclusion that on average, people spend almost an hour a day on gossiping. And this is longer than the time I spent on studying gossip. So this is how important gossip is in our daily life. And normally, at this point, I would go into my study. And when people ask me, why did you study this? So the normal answer to this question is, because gossip just takes such a substantial part in our daily life, and that's why we need to study that. But since we have a very special audience of all experts on computational social science and also psychologists, so I would actually tell you a more honest version of this. So a little story behind why I chose to study this topic. And now let me ask you, so this picture, usually during rainy seasons, sometimes you will see these small islands or rafts floating on the river. So any guesses of what this might be? Or what is this little raft consist of?
Mud.
Yeah. So actually the next picture may be a bit disturbing. So actually they are not mud, but ants. Yeah. So I'll show you that disturbing picture. So since I was very young, I started to be fascinated about the story of ants. So during rainy seasons, when the flood comes into the hole of ants, the ants they would huddle together, and they put babies and the queen into the middle, and the worker ants will rotate, serving on the edge of that little raft, and they would keep paddling to drive the raft. Sometimes they can keep in this form for days until they find a dry place to land. So since I was very young when I heard of this extraordinary stories of ants and bees and how they showed the really high level of organization and cooperative behavior and those complicated social behaviors, I was always amazed. And I was trained as a psychologist. And oftentimes in psychology, when we want to understand the social behavior, we will talk about the motivation, the emotion, and the cognition that lead the individual into that decision. And based on my understanding, those like little animals, of course, they do have brains, but they should not be that smart. Now, how can I show this extraordinary format of cooperation, even make our human beings embarrassed? And I have been having this question until when I was in college. It was a serendipity that I read this book, Social Biology, a famous book written by Edward Wilson, and that just opened a whole new world to me. So yeah, in that book, they studied the social behavior of animals, and they explain the behavioral patterns of these animals, not in terms, not as an individual decision driven by the motivation, emotion, cognition, but more as adaptive to the environment. So they argue that actually these social behaviors, they serve a function, and that function helps the survival of the gene, and that's why we show those behavior. I'm not a biologist, so I do not study social biology, but I was very much inspired by this idea. So how can we just not only study these behaviors from the individual level, but study this social behavior as an adaptation to the environment. And that made me interested in the field of cultural evolution, to study human cultural traits and social behavior in terms of their adaptation to the environment. So I try to understand social behavior as an adaptation to the environment through the evolutionary process. But here I do want to mention that when I say evolutionary process, I actually didn't mean gene evolution. I didn't learn biology, but I just took the idea. So it's more from a social learning approach. Is that how we keep observing each other, update our behavior so that we can adapt our behavior to the environment. So although if you look into my profile, this actually really troubles me. The titles of my papers actually are very different, seemingly irrelevant topics. Yeah, it has always been a problem. But actually, I'm pretty sure that they all somehow consistent in terms of logic. I've always been interested in how environment shapes our cooperation and coordination behavior, and also the mechanisms behind the link between the environment and individual behavior. And finally, let's get back to gossip. So in this study, I also hope to study the evolution or the first appearance of gossiping behavior from an evolutionary perspective. And why do we gossip? So as a psychologist, you may have many answers to that. Actually, this is a very established field. So it is for entertainment, for because we want to protect our group for information or to harm others. But again, this is just from individual decision making. But what I'm more interested in is that why do gossipers involve in the first place? And if you're familiar with the literature in the evolution of gossip, or just gossip in general, so many of these previous studies have mentioned, like, behind the evolution of gossip is the role of gossip in cooperation. And why can these two seemingly irrelevant things be connected together? So cooperation, we all know, is that we spend a little cost to help others so that we can benefit another people or the whole group. And cooperation has always been facing the threat from free riding. And free riding is that we just take advantage of others' cooperative behavior, and so that we don't need to cost anything, but we receive the benefit. And for a long time, researchers have been thinking about what kind of mechanism can help us overcome the free riding problem and to facilitate cooperation in a group. And one of the mechanisms that is widely studied is called indirect reciprocity. And what it means, so if helping someone else will give you a good reputation, and a good reputation will also help you receive more help from others. And through this reputation system, cooperation can be sustained. And this is like one of the most well-studied mechanism behind the evolution of cooperation. And this is through the following two mechanisms. One is that help individual if we have such a reputation system in our society, the individuals can select only nice partners and avoid being exploited by others. And another mechanism is that if you know that your bad behavior will be known by others because you carry a reputation, then you will be careful about your behavior in the future. So this is how indirect reciprocity will help facilitate cooperation. But we all know that in reality, we do not have such a reputation billboard that everyone's reputation is written on that. And how do we human beings maintain such a reputation billboard in our mind? And that is through gossip. So gossip is the way how we can know each other's reputation and to facilitate cooperation through this reputation system. So if you look into the literature, I didn't even cite any literature because if you just search on Google, there are so many papers talking about how gossip facilitates cooperation, both empirical work and modeling work. But so normally, if I talk to friends that gossip facilitates cooperation, they would first get surprised. Oh, that means gossip is useful, right? And I said yes. And then immediately they would come into a conclusion. Because gossip benefits cooperation. Oh, that's why we gossip. But I'm not sure whether you noticed this gap here. So just because some behavior would lead to a good outcome, it actually doesn't mean that that behavior will emerge in the first place. So but if you look at all the gossiping models, usually the way how they did that is that they just assume that in the population there is a certain amount of gossip or a certain amount of gossipers, and then they would do a variety of different versions of model to look at how gossip leads to cooperation. But in my opinion, all these models didn't solve the problem. The key problem here is that why did this gossip or gossipers emerge in the first place? So my model moved a step forward. So I try to understand why do people gossip in the first place. And actually, my conclusion was a little similar to theirs. I found that actually the reason why gossipers involved is because of its impacts on cooperation. But is not because it benefits cooperation, but it's because of two more specific roles that it plays in the cooperation process. One is the reputation dissemination function that it plays, and the other is the selfishness deterrence function. And the words, I will explain the whole mechanism later. So in this paper, I proposed a theory called the evolutionary cycle of gossip. And because this is a cycle, actually you can start from any part of the cycle. So let's just start from the top, which is the number of gossip. So assume that for any random reason, there is just a small amount of gossip or a small amount of information flowing in this system. Then, because of the reputation dissemination function of gossip, that will increase reputation accessibility. And because now this information is more available, that will make more individuals to condition their behavior on others' reputations. So if you just don't know who is good, who is bad, the better strategy for you is just to defect with anyone, just to protect yourself, because only that you are safe. And only when this information is enough will you take advantage of this information. And because more people are taking advantage of this information, that makes more people concerned of their own reputation, and they want to live a good reputation in this reputation system. And the way they do that is through the selfishness deterrence function of gossip, which is that they would cooperate more with gossipers so that they can live a better reputation in gossip. If I know that whatever I do to you, you will never tell other people, I just don't care because that will not influence my reputation. But if I know that you are a gossiper, then when I interact with you, I will pay more attention because I don't want you to tell what I did to other people. So they will cooperate more actually with gossipers. And just because of this selfishness deterrence function of gossip, that will lead to more people to become gossipers. And the more gossipers will further disseminate more information and sustain this reputation system. So that becomes a cycle. So you don't need to have more gossipers at the beginning, but gossipers will emerge itself and become the majority of the population. So in this model, in this paper, I use an agent-based model and a couple of virtual experiments to test the process. And so I guess because this is computational social science nowadays, so I probably don't need to talk much about agent-based model. Yeah, maybe just a little information. So in an agent-based model, you just create a group of virtual agents. And these agents are like an oversimplified version of human beings. They cannot go to sleep, they cannot eat, but they have some basic memory, and they can do some simple decision making based on the rule that I give them. And then based on this limited cognitive ability, they interact with each other and also with the environments that I created for them. And then they will gain some information and also some payoff from this interaction. And then they just interact, keep getting feedback and adjust to this feedback, and they will learn and develop. And then I will observe the large-scale consequences of these different behaviors. So as I mentioned, I use an evolutionary approach. So I actually use a very special framework or version of agent-based model, which is an evolutionary game-theoretic framework. So the EGT framework, it takes a cultural evolution perspective. So in this framework, I assume cultural traits as discrete gene-like entities. It's not say that I assume that they are they're driven by genes, but I just treat them as if they are genes and use the same way as the evolution of genes to model this. So what I do is like this. So you know that in biological evolution, we have variations in genes. So in this model, I assume that we have variations in behaviors. I give agents different types of strategies. And because this is model about gossiping and cooperation, so I give them different gossiping strategies and cooperation strategies. So they have all the possibilities to start with. And then with these strategies, they interact in the environment. And in my model, I let them to interact in a cooperation game, and I also let them gossip. And then, and from this interaction, they would gain some information, and they would also gain payoffs from this interaction. And just as how natural selection happens in biological evolution, I assume that selection on social behaviors will also happen. And this is happen through social learning. So the idea is simple, just people will observe each other, either like observe their peers or learn from their parents. But in general, more behaviors lead to higher payoff will proliferate in the future. And you see that the next generation, they will have some new behaviors, and with these new behaviors, they interact in the game again, and then they will update their strategies again. And if we repeat this loop, we will be able to observe the change in the proportions of different behaviors over time, so that I will know, like at the very beginning, we have all different types, but like gradually you will see that one behavior will win and become an adaptive behavior to the environment. And so let's first look at the behavioral options that I give them, which are my gossiping and cooperation strategies. So each agent strategy consists of two parts, one regarding their gossiping behavior, the other regarding their cooperation behavior. And for the gossiping strategy, very easy. They are either gossipers who always gossip or non-gossipers who do not gossip. So I didn't assume that they have to gossip or have to not gossip. I just give them the possibilities. And for cooperation strategies, it's a bit complicated. There are 6 strategies, 6 versions of strategies, and they can be categorized into 3 types. The first type is unconditional strategies. So agents who have an unconditional cooperative strategy, they do not care reputation at all. They don't care about others' reputation, and they don't care about their own reputation. So they either always cooperate, which is unconditional cooperator, or they just always defect, unconditional defector. And the second type is what I call reputation-sensitive agents. These agents, they take advantage of the reputation system, and they care about others' reputation. They want to use this reputation system to protect themselves. And there are also 2 types in this category. So the first is virtuous agents. These are, you can think, the most virtuous version of all strategies you can imagine. So these agents use the reputation system only to protect themselves. They would, in general, cooperate unless they know that their partner will defect with them. In that circumstance, they will defect in order to protect themselves. So that's why they're called virtuous. And exploitive agents are a little bit evil version of this. They also take advantage of the reputation system, but they use that not only to protect themselves, but also to exploit others. They would generally defect, but will cooperate only when that they know their partner's cooperation decision is conditional on their own cooperation decision. So why? Because if their partner's cooperation is conditional on their own decision, then if I defect, they will defect, and we will both not get enough payoff. But only when they know, only when that situation happens, they will cooperate. Otherwise, if they know that their partner, whatever I do, my partner will always cooperate or will always defect, they will defect so that they won't lose anything. So this is why I call it exploitative. And the third type of cooperation strategy is gossiper sensitive. So these agents, they care about their own strategy. And I also have 2 versions of that. One is opportunist. Opportunists, they really want to leave a good reputation of themselves in the system. So they would cooperate with gossipers. So in order to make the gossiper believe that they are good agents. And I also have an opposite version of this strategy, which is reverse opportunistic. So this type of agent is a bit weird. They intentionally ruin their own reputation. They would defect with gossipers just in order to leave a bad reputation in the system. And now you may ask me, why do I have such a weird strategy? So this is the whole logic of this model. I cannot just assume that people want to have good reputation. I cannot assume that they are born to carry reputation. I need to give them all the different possibilities and to let these possibilities compete with each other. So I didn't implement any hypothesis into the model. So no matter whether they choose to gossip or they choose to care about their own reputation or they choose to care about others' reputation, that's their own decision. So this is the evolutionary approach of that. And that was strategy. And in addition to that, each agent also has a brain. So that brain stores all their knowledge about others. So specifically in such a matrix, you can see that each agent has a specific understanding of another agent. So in this cell is the understanding of agent 1 of agent, it's how agent 2 is in agent 1's mind. And this brain consists of 3 parts. One is a probability table. So in this table, it is the probability that agent 1 believes agent 2 is of a certain type. And in this table, it means that with a 0.5 probability that agent 1 believes that agent 2 is always defector, and with a tiny little probability that agent 1 thinks that agent 2 might be a reverse opportunist. So just because we all have some uncertainty of others' type, so that's why it's a probability table. And also each agent has a hypothesis strategy, which is sampled from this probability table. So although I have a lot of doubts, I know there are all different types of possibilities, but when I treat this agent, I have to make a decision. So I have to sample one strategy from this table based on this probability. And in this situation, agent 1 overall decided to believe that agent 2 is exploitative agent. And when, for this when an agent encounter another one, they will treat the partner as if they are of the hypothesis strategy. And when they gossip about this agent, they will also tell others that they are a CD. And also, because sometimes I know like how likely this person is, but sometimes I'm just not sure. So each agent also has a confidence level of this belief, which is the maximum number of this table. If I'm pretty sure that this agent is of the AD type, then this number will be very high and I'm very confident. And otherwise, if this is a flat distribution, this number will be low. And so that's all what an individual has. So let me just pause a little bit and ask any questions, clarification questions so far that I need to clarify.
How does the agent generate the probability table?
Yes. So at the very beginning is all random, and then we have cooperation phase, we have gossip phase, and so through these interactions, they will keep updating this information based on what they see and what they hear. Yeah, and I will show you in this phase. Okay, so that was what an agent have, and then we will ask how they interact with each other. So in my typical model, I have 200 agents connected in a small world network, and they will do 2 phases of game. The first one is a cooperation phase. So in this phase, they do pairwise cooperation game. And how an agent do to another agent depends on their own strategy and also their belief of their partner's strategy. And in a cooperation game, based on the definition of cooperation, is to carry out a behavior that is costly to perform but benefits other individuals. So I use the very classic prisoner's dilemma payoff matrix. So based on their decision, they will gain the corresponding payoff from this decision. But the payoff is just one thing from this interaction. Whenever we interact with another people, we not only get a material payoff, but also know some information about our partner. This is how first-hand information comes from. And so in the interaction, agents gain some information about their partner's strategies. Usually people will gain information about the real strategy of their interaction partner. But there are just one or two exceptions. One exception is that opportunistic agents, because they are the, if you still remember, they are the agents who care about their reputation and they want to bribe gossipers to be able to gain a good reputation. So they would cooperate with gossipers and make gossipers believe that they are virtuous. And the opposite is reverse opportunistic agents. So these agents will convey to gossipers that they are unconditional defectors by defecting with gossipers. So these are the only two exceptions. Otherwise, you just gain some information about the type of your partner. And from the perceiver's perspective, if your partner tries to convey to me that I'm of a certain type, then in your probability table, the probability of the corresponding type will increase. So if my partner showed me that they are an AC, then in my table, this probability will increase a little bit and other probabilities will decrease proportionally. And that is controlled by a parameter. You cannot know know exactly who they are. You just increase this likelihood a little bit. And accordingly, you will also update your hypothesis strategy based on the new distribution and have a new confidence level. And that was what happens in cooperation. And then we have a gossiping phase. So gossiping phase consist of conversations, and only gossipers gossip. And whenever there is a gossiping conversation, there is a gossiper, a listener, and a target. And the gossip will tell the listener, first, the overall belief of the target, and also the confidence of the belief. So this is not, so in real life, we don't usually tell people like a number of our confidence, but I assume that in general, people can somehow figure that out. For example, you may say, oh, I guess he or she is probably something, or I'm pretty sure that he did that. So you can tell the confidence level. And from the listener's perspective, if you told me that that target is of a certain type, then the probability of the total type will increase by a certain amount. And how much is this amount? So the influence of a specific piece of gossip is decided by two things. One is a parameter called indirect weight. This is the general trust of gossip. It's in general, like to what extent I trust any gossip. But for each specific piece of gossip, there is also a specific weight. This is decided by the confidence of the gossiper. If the gossiper is super confident, then the weight will be higher. If the gossiper is not sure, then the weight of that specific piece of gossip will be lower. And here I implemented another parameter called bias, which is how much more weight you give to more confident gossip. So when there is no bias, you can see in this picture, then I just trust any pieces of gossip equally. But when the bias is super high, I only trust the most confident or the most reliable gossip. And please keep in mind this parameter because later I will show you this is actually a very important parameter for the whole system to work. And so far, I've talked about how people talk and how they interact. And then comes the strategy updating. So this is actually super intuitive. So after they've gained these payoffs, I implemented this social learning. Each time I choose some agents as students. And each student will randomly select a neighbor as their teacher. And the student will compare its own payoff with the teacher's payoff. If the teacher's payoff is much higher than the student, then it's more likely that the student will switch to the teacher's strategy. So this is selection. This is also strategy updating. And you can see that after one round of interaction, agents will have new strategies, and then with this new strategy, they will interact again. And if I repeat this loop for many times, I will be able to see how the different types of strategy would change over time. And so maybe I will pause and for a little bit and ask you like any more questions regarding the model setup. Yes, please.
How do you decide the initial parameters, like the distribution of the number of gossipers versus the number of non-gossipers?
So yeah.
Or is it a parameter that you will just change it to check its influence regarding the distribution of gossiper versus non-gossiper, or for initial setting of the parameters?
Yeah, so for the proportion of gossipers specifically is half-half. So for setup in this model, because this is like pretty typical for this approach, you just like don't half-half anything. But actually, I can show you later. Even if I change the proportion, it doesn't change like that much. As long as you have some amount of gossip to initiate this loop, then it will eventually become the majority. So, and for other parameters, yes, I did like use random levels, and I test all the different levels and see whether how that will influence the eventual results. Yeah. Yes, please.
So another question about the initial distribution. You have 200 agents, right, and pairwise interactions. So do they have all opportunities to interact with each other? So I'm thinking this like more like organization of like 200 employees and just interact with each other. But I think, depending on the purpose of gossiper, so there may be some kind of like segregation within all which could be very interesting. So I'm just wondering about that and condition about kind of how like selection of the agents can cover all organization or can be segregated as an outcome of like the gossip.
Yeah, good question. So actually the default model, I did have a social network, which is a small world network. But in my robustness test, I actually tried different types of networks and also different degrees of network. So the results, I will show you, actually it matters. So network structure will influence the evolution of cooperation and also the amount of gossipers. But in general, like the keys, the key conclusion was not affected. But actually, honestly, I didn't look at the segregation of information, but I love this idea. So maybe this is something else I should look into. Yeah, the network in general, that did influence proportion, but doesn't influence the main idea. Yeah. Okay, so if you don't mind, maybe we can move on. And as you see my results, maybe you will have a better idea. So the first thing is in this model, I want to test the sufficiency of this evolutionary cycle. So which I mean that if I implement both the replication dissemination function and the selfishness deterrence function, then will that cycle be sustained? And so I didn't make many assumptions. I just assume that gossip can disseminate information. And this is the definition of gossip. I have to assume that. And then I just give agents the possibility to condition their behavior on others' reputation. And also give agents the possibility to manage their reputation. I also didn't say that they have to do that. I just give them that possibility. And I will show you that as long as you have these three things in the model, then gossipers will become the majority. So most of the population will evolve as gossipers, and information accuracy will also increase a little bit, and that will also facilitate cooperation. And so that can actually be the end of the story. But the next step I did is that I wanted to know the necessity of the mechanism. In other words, I have many elements in the cycle. I want to know whether all of these parts are necessary. What if I remove one of that? And will gossipers still evolve in that case? And the first thing I try to do is to cut off this link and to turn off the reputation dissemination function of gossip. And there are many ways you can do that. You can just let gossipers stop talking. They still talk, but they don't share useful information. Or they can just share inaccurate information. And I found that if gossipers cannot disseminate the reputation information effectively, then all of these parts will decrease and not many gossipers will involve. So this is the result. So if gossipers just do not share useful information, then they will not involve. And information accuracy, of course, low. And not many people will condition their behavior on others' reputation. And also people wouldn't bother to manage their own reputation. And another thing I wanted to try is that is just completely turn off the function of gossip. And I want to know whether the reputation accessibility, the increase in reputation accessibility is the direct reason why people would condition their behavior on others' reputation. And in that way, I just exogenously manipulated reputation accuracy in the system. And I found that, yes, indeed, as reputation accessibility increases, the more people will condition their behavior on others' reputation. So this is that model. So the x-axis is information accuracy that are exogenously controlled. And I found that virtuous agents, people who take advantage of the reputation system, will increase. And also cooperation rate will increase as we have more information about others. And here I found an interesting jump here. So I found that when your reputation accuracy is really low, so it actually didn't change cooperation much. So only when gossip can boost information accuracy to above a certain threshold will the reputation accuracy help. And this is actually consistent with a lot of previous literature on indirect reciprocity, like how much information you will need to be able to initiate this reputation system. And then the second part I want to test is that, remember, so many people say that gossipers involved is because they give us information and the information is good for cooperation. And I wanted to argue that's not enough, right? So what I did is that if I just remove the whole left part of the link, then will gossipers still involve? And the first way I did that is I just removed gossiper sensitive agents, the opportunists who care about their own reputation. I removed these agents and I assume that if no people cares about their own reputation and to cooperate intentionally with gossipers, then the whole system will not run. And this is my result. Yes, if there are no opportunists, then there will not be gossipers. And then I did a more mild version of that. I say that if people I still allow them to cooperate with gossipers. But if they cannot successfully manage their reputation by this, cooperating with gossipers. How can you do that? If you just assume that gossipers are super smart, even if you cooperate with me, I can immediately tell that is fake. I don't help you. Or if there is some public reputation system that everyone knows everyone's reputation immediately, then bribing gossipers will not be useful, right? If opportunists can cooperate with gossipers, but they just cannot successfully manage their reputation, then even in that case, gossipers will not involve either. So this is with no reputation management, you see, no gossipers involved. And in this case, not many people bother to become opportunists because that is not just helpful. So actually, this is a 2-by-2 situation. So only when both functions of gossip exist can gossipers involve. And so by test the different steps in this model, step by step, I showed that the reputation, dissemination, and selfishness deterrence functions of gossip are jointly sufficient and also both necessary for the emergence of gossipers. And then so that is basically the end of that paper. But in the discussion, I spent maybe one paragraph, which is my 45 pages in my supplementary. So I tested the questions that the lady asked. So the different parameters, I was interested in, like, if I change different parts of the model, like if I start with different proportions or like just change different parameters, how that will influence the prevalence of cooperation and also the prevalence of gossipers. So the factors I manipulated, including individual factors, interpersonal factors, and also environmental factors. So I will just highlight some results that I think is interesting. The first one is actually my key conclusions was replicated across all these different parameter choices, except for only one. I found that gossip only involves when people can differentiate between confident and unconfident gossip. So in this plot, the x, sorry. Yes. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so in this plot, the x-axis is bias. It's how much more weight you give to more reliable gossip. And I found that, so the black dot here is the control condition with no gossip. And I found that if people just blindly trust any gossip they hear, then there will not be many gossipers, and information accuracy will also be low, and also cooperation rate will be super low. Yeah, why? Because like the second-hand information is polluting your first-hand information. Yeah, so I think this result emphasized the impact of misinformation. Yeah, so it's really important for people to differentiate between reliable and unreliable information. And actually, this is consistent with literature in developmental psychology. So when child starting from very young, child can actually somehow differentiate like who is the expert. So people do have this ability. And then I found the parameters that can influence the prevalence of cooperation and gossiper. I found that gossip is most beneficial for promoting cooperation when individuals have many neighbors, network mobility is high, individuals interact infrequently, interactions are shallow, strategy updating is infrequent. So this is basically if you do not have that much deep interaction, you don't have the information, then gossip will help you the most. And I also found that gossip is more beneficial when conversations are neither too frequent nor too infrequent, and when people rely on gossip, neither too little nor too much. So actually, it's a curvilinear relationship. Because when there is not enough gossip, you do not have enough information, and it's of course useless. But if there is too much gossip, then the second-hand information will pollute your first-hand experience, and that will also not be helpful. And this is basically, so the first couple, so these are consistent with previous literature on indirect reciprocity. And this is just my own finding, which I think makes sense. And the benefit of gossip is measured by the difference between gossip versus no gossip condition. This is like how much more gossip can increase cooperation. But here you will see that the situations when gossip is most useful are not the situations when gossipers are most prevalent. Gossipers are more prevalent when individuals have many neighbors, network mobility is low, individuals interact frequently, interactions are deep, strategy updating is infrequent, conversations happen frequently and individuals rely much on gossip. And actually, the right side is consistent with literature saying that gossipers are really prevalent in small villages where everyone knows everyone, deep interaction, and people like gossip in that situation. But in that situation, actually people do not need gossip and like that much, but many people would love to gossip. So Remember, at the very beginning, I said that as we already know, people know that gossip benefits cooperation. But actually, this model shows that the reason why gossipers involved is not that they benefit cooperation. And opportunists are actually the key in this cycle. They seem like a evil strategy, like hypocriticals. Yeah, but actually only when they exist will gossipers receive the benefit and will they maintain the system and also facilitate cooperation. So the whole mechanism is the evolutionary cycle of gossip. Okay, so this is the end of the presentation. I would like to thank my two advisors when I was a PhD student, Dr. Michelle Gelfand and Dr. Dana Nall. And Vincent Xiao has always been a collaborator of mine and also many people who helped me. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Pan. We still have a lot of time for question and answer. So any questions from the audience?
Thank you, Professor Pan, for this very enlightening and provocative. To me, it's provocative finding. It's very general, so general that it seems to cut across different disciplines. And I want to think small in this case. You have a general setup, very interesting and pretty precise predictions and outcomes. But I want to think in a more concrete context as a sociologist. In a system of gossip, as a sociologist, instinctively I would concern not only whether there's gossip, whether there's information flow, whether there's cooperation, but also impact on individual, the rise and fall of individual reputation, regardless of what the true, so-called the true reputation is. There's nothing in the predictions so far that can help me as a sociologist to understand how to link the consequences to that central variable, so-called outcome, sociological outcome I would be concerned about. This is my first puzzle, and see how you help me think through this, absorb the lessons. Secondly, as a sociologist, I will also think about what Putnam would say, social capital of system. People are talking and gossiping within, whether it's a diffuse society or highly knit or highly specified organizational boundary, gossiping within an organization. You can always define something about social capital, about that system. It's about the so-called the goodness or badness, right, fortune and misfortune of the whole system evolution. So how would these kind of findings you got help one may predict about the improvement or decline of social capital in the community? The third that I couldn't answer myself, so I would like to hear the final thing is I would like to think in concrete terms. Gossiping about dating behavior of others, reputation of boys and girls in a peer network at school is one thing. Does this model help us understand reputation development, so-called cooperation in that peer network? What about in a workplace where we concern the most? Gossips are typically not about empty, so-called abstract reputations. It's usually about misbehaviors, negative information, negative reputation. We don't call it gossip if it is so-called praising someone, right? In Chinese, at least. So it's usually about negative. In the way you try to define it is trying to be neutral. Reputation information. What if a system has abundance of let's not worry about positive gossip according to the technical definition, but just negative.
Yeah.
Does all the predictions work if it is restricting attention to negative gossips in a workplace environment? And how would you define cooperation other than the flow or the presence, emergence of gossiper? Maybe the more the worse, the more gossiper doing negative reputation gossiping would be more devastating to the morale of the social capital of an organization. So all these things keep coming up when I think about the modeling. How would you help a sociologist like me to learn more? Thank you.
Thank you so much. These are all so insightful questions, and actually, honestly, I'm not sure I can answer any of them. So yeah, based on my understanding, I received like 4 questions. The first one, social capital one. So that's the second one, but maybe I can answer that first. So I feel that actually in my model, I also define cooperation quite broadly. It's not like doing a team project or something. Yeah, but so I think in anthropology somehow they like define cooperation. They think that all the all the accumulated culture and also the wealth and also the technology, something like that, they all come from cooperation somehow. So I would say if we just make everything over simple, the social capital or the overall like benefit, the overall well-being of a group can somehow be mapped to the individual cooperative efforts in some way. So I would say, like in my very like little understanding of sociology, actually, my guess is that as long as cooperation increases, then that may benefit many different aspects of the society. If I understood your question. Yeah, so I would consider cooperation as a more like general effort that you contribute to the people in your social group. So any gossip does benefit cooperation. Yeah, then that will increase. And also, I have actually only one number in my whole model, which is payoff. And that number is linked only to cooperation. Like the higher cooperation, the payoff of everyone will be higher, and also the payoff of this whole group will be higher. So I'm not sure whether about that. And as for your third question, I really love that question. I'm personally curious about that question too. The dating, right? The dating setting. And I feel that just because cooperation is such a generally defined, I feel that in each specific field, or speaking of like a specific behavior, like dating behavior, cooperation can be interpreted in that way too. Like if it's in workplace, then cooperation means that whether this colleague works enough to contribute to our work project. But in dating market, the gossip maybe if the guy dated me and then eventually betrayed me, then he will have bad reputation in that scenario. So I feel that the general reputation thing can also be applied to that setting, broadly. Yeah, but the honest answer is that I only know how to model that in terms of cooperation. So I see everything, as long as good for any person, I see that as cooperation. And if it hurts another person, I see it as a defection in a very broad way. Yeah, I'm not sure. And as for your first question, the impacts on specific individuals. So actually, in my model, so in many, in the literature in indirect reciprocity, there are actually many different ways to model reputation. So some model would use an image score. That is like a one-dimensional scale. It means like if you like just simply define the reputation as good, like super good, or bad, super bad. So it's a one-dimensional thing. But actually, in my model, I deliberately make that not on a dimension. So I have always cooperator, always defector, and also conditional cooperators. And when people gossip, actually you're gossiping about what type of people they are, but not necessarily whether they are good. For example, do you think always cooperator is better than a conditional cooperator who like would like defect back, who would do tit for tat? So which one is actually a better reputation in this situation? I'm not sure. And in literature, like they do not agree with each other. Some people say that you always cooperate, so the number of cooperations you are higher in terms of that, then you are good. But some other would say that if you just do not do tit for tat, you are not good for the whole system. And just as I like showed you, opportunists, that may seem like a bad behavior because you are not genuine cooperators, but you just want to like manage your reputation. But actually, they did something good for maintaining the system. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but you said that the like the increase or decrease in terms of reputation. So that is one way to model that. But actually, in my model, I somehow intentionally try to avoid that change. That is just like as long as people know what type of people you are, there is always some benefits in not benefits. So information is information. Let's just not judge that like on a one-dimensional scale. So this is my philosophy in this model. But I do agree that when people has a certain reputation in this system, they are affected, and that's why opportunists bother to manage their reputation by cooperating with gossipers because it matters a lot. And actually, in my other versions of robustness test, I did check like how much time a person is like defected, just because of their reputation, like how much they are defected. And I found that actually the best strategy is not always cooperators. The best strategy is actually virtuous and exploitive. So they are the people who are defected the least because they show people that they're doing tit for tat, so they have the power to protect themselves. So I think this is like more complicated than like just good reputation. You want to have good reputation. So I would say maybe you want a more complicated reputation, like you are good, but also you are powerful, you are conditional cooperator, something like that. Yeah.
I don't want to use too much time, but I need to clarify the first question.
Yeah.
I was speaking as a sociologist, and I think economists would very much understand why I posed that question. If it is an informational mechanism, gossip, it has to affect how people believe and understand the real distribution, underlying latent distribution of something.
Yeah.
Say, suppose there's a distribution of quality, whatever it is, whether it's trustworthiness or just a talent, innovativeness or fidelity in a romance relationship. That's something a distribution has to be there, objectively definable. Then gossip helps us to overcome uncertainty. We don't know the true state of all the individuals within the system. Yeah. So gossip, even if negative, may have a positive function in revealing the true distribution, having closer approximation, everyone can have a better grasp of the latent distribution before and without gossip.
Yeah.
So I would expect that with a brilliant group of scientists in working on the model, you may be able to, you do not define it as part of your outcome, interested outcome, but economists and sociologists would very much like, I think, know the impact of this process of rise and fall of gossip on how people understand better the true quality underlying the system. This is also why I have the final question. Even when we define gossip as negative information about someone, that makes the whole modeling process less abstract and more precise, understandable too. I think if you just focus on that, you can link to many workplace phenomena better, more directly, intuitively. Answering the different scenarios I have in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your very inspiring talk. I have two questions. I think the first one is about, because when I hear your talk, I'm always thinking about, what do we gossip in our daily life? And I always, like, when I engage in gossip, the person will say, oh, it's between the two of us, please don't tell other people. And of course, some people will not keep the promise and always spread the gossip, whereas other people will keep the promise. Right? So I'm wondering whether your model has any parameter that actually controls whether people actually spread the gossip or not. So that is one question, because I want to see whether it can be actually generalizable to real life when especially gossip is about negative things that you don't want to tell other people, but actually it may be just not really the case because people always want to spread the gossip, not keeping the promise. And then the second question actually is related to Professor Tam's question, because gossip is always negative, right? Negative information. So I was wondering whether this will affect other impacts, other impacts apart from cooperation or social capital. Because if gossip is about negative information, will people be more cautious? They always want to follow norms, not to do something unique, not to break the rules and norms of the organizations, for example. Would that actually reduce creativity among the group of people? Because creativity is always about doing something new. But if you are afraid of being the target of gossip, you may be very cautious. Would that reduce your creativity or your tendency to explore new ideas or do something unique that other people don't do?
Yeah, thank you so much. So, sorry, what was
The first question might be whether there is any parameter
I
to control the spread.
Yeah, so I didn't have general parameter controlling how much people gossip and how much they trust gossip, but I think your idea is really interesting. It's like I do not have a parameter controlling that. Like you tell me not to tell this specific piece of gossip to another person. I didn't differentiate that because sometimes people gossip and they don't tell you to keep that as a secret, but sometimes people do care. So I guess that's what you are interested in, right? So yeah, honestly, I didn't have this part in the model. So yeah, but I love this idea, like whether people differentiate which information is from gossip and or like some gossip is can be spread, but some gossip I should only have that myself. Maybe intimacy can be moderator here. Yeah, you only tell the secret to your best friends, but not your with weak ties. So yeah, I like this idea. Yeah, and also regarding creativity. So yes. So first, in my model, I actually cannot differentiate like which one is negative because, like just as I said, its reputation is not on the scale, so I didn't look into that. But literature did find that gossip is a way how people convey norms. So they show their loyalty to the current group norm by gossiping about norm violators. And also means, so it's not even necessarily negative gossip, but whenever it's about group norms, and gossip will make that tighter. And yeah, in another branch of literature, like if you have a really tight norm, that will influence creativity a little bit because you just don't want to be different. So I didn't look at it in my own model, but I guess there might be a link, and this is through maybe like social norm. Yeah.
We have the question from the audience, Professor Haikila. We have a question from the online audience.
Yes. Well, thank you, Professor Penn, for your talk. I just have a couple of comments that in some ways build on Professor Tom's observations as well. Just one is just with respect, in some sense, it strikes me that the term gossip, in a sense, everyone knows, but in another sense, it wasn't actually defined in a kind of formal way, at least in the presentation. So for example, there are things like gossip magazines, right, which wouldn't fit within the context of your model, right? These kind of magazines that talk about movie stars and put all kinds of information, that actually doesn't fit. So even though we all sort of think we know what gossip is, unless it's formally defined, sort of testing it in the context of a formal model and thinking about how we evaluate it is a little bit problematic, or could be. So I would encourage, sort of thinking about a kind of formal definition. That kind of brings it back. That's how I think it might relate to some of Professor Tom's comments and some of my own to follow, which is that kind of, in a sense, to me, that what you're describing is maybe a kind of specific example of a more general problem of maybe asymmetric information or the value of information. And that depends on the context in which it's being applied, right? And in a game theoretical context, one would have to lay out sort of specify the structure of the game, the payoffs and the rules, etc., in order to be able to really sort of then make some evaluation of the value of additional information of a specific type in a given context. So, and I guess it strikes me that, like Professor Tom's comments, we're looking at the context of sociology, which reflects his background training. My own sort of training is more in economics. And when I think about, there's a lot of work done in economics that has been done for decades on asymmetric information. Akerlof, there was a very famous, actually he's Janet Yellen, his wife, is more famous now as the Secretary Treasurer until tomorrow, or until today, your time, right? But her husband, Akerlof, won a Nobel Prize and one of the papers that made him famous long ago, many decades ago, was a kind of market for lemons, the market for used cars, where there's asymmetric information. People who own the cars know more about the value of the car, the quality of the car, than do the buyers who don't have close information. So those are kind of that's a kind of a market context in which there's asymmetric information. And so you can infer sort of in those are kind of in economic markets. Markets have the advantage of being kind of games that have price signals, value signals attached to them. And so there may be opportunities for kind of testing or exploring further the kind of market, the kind of model that you've developed. If you do it in a market context and link to some of the work that's been done there, you might be able to harness some of those ideas and link it to data that are apparent. So another example in the context of markets or in economics would be just things like there are firms that go out and sell information about, say, the quality or the value, say, bond rating agencies. So if bond rating agency would look at different, bonds are essentially people who are looking to borrow money, right? And if you're a lender, you want to know about the likelihood that if you lend the money, you're going to be paid back. So bond rating agencies go and they assess different companies or different organizations, different institutions that might be issuing bonds, and they rate them, the AAA bond or an A- bond or something like this, and that would influence the rate at which borrowers could borrow money, the interest rates for these kinds of transactions. So it's a specific kind of context where you can actually get at the value of information. Now, we don't call that information gossip, but again, that's why I thought that the definition, by using a term like gossip, which everyone thinks they know what it means, but in fact, it might apply in a sense to contexts where no one uses the term gossip. Bond rating agencies, it's not gossip, it's information, it's a rating information, it's a credit-worthy information. So I think a little bit more precision about some of the terms in the context would then help to take your very interesting ideas and maybe give them a little bit more traction in specific contexts.
Yeah.
So
Thank
just
you.
a comment, yes. But I enjoyed the presentation very much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for your comments. And I'm sorry for making you all disappointed by the definition of gossip. Yeah, maybe it's not.
That wasn't an expression of disappointment. Just a suggestion for future.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I actually, I forgot that, but I did receive like very similar comments also from before. So maybe I should like talk a little bit about the very specific context. Yeah, that is more about information and also about mutual information. So, and I really like your suggestions on the application of that, maybe like in the marketplace. I actually, when I like did literature review for this paper, I did see some like similar ideas as you suggested. Yeah. So thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, appreciate it.
So much for the presentation, very inspiring views of evolutionary game theory. I'm wondering that currently many forms of gossip actually happens online, especially with the presence of recommendation algorithm. So I'm interested in how actually I believe or observe even many forms of gossip are actually pushed forward to you with the by the recommendation platform.
Yeah.
For example, like TikTok, 小红书. So how what do you think about how does your model fits such online platform with the presence of recommendation algorithm?
Yeah, I love this idea. So honestly, I never thought about that. But I think one key thing is information accuracy, because my model like repeatedly showed that the whole system only works when you have like accurate information So I would say if those algorithms, they pollute the information, then that will decrease everything. So that's the number one thing. And another thing I think that is changing like information network, because you may like unproportionally know like the information about some people. They're either remote or close, depending on how the algorithm decided that. And I didn't think about that, but I think maybe we can model that. Yeah, like you just, so in my model, now you gossip only to your immediate neighbors. Yeah, this is the setup, but I can easily tweak that, like for some reason, like you just get information from your remote neighbors or like from a specific group in your like network structure and see how that will influence the information flow and also, yeah, other behaviors. So I love your suggestion. I just didn't have an answer for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Pan, for this really provocative talk. As you can see, the many questions you received up to now. Actually, my question is overlap with the previous questions, but from a relatively different perspective. Specifically, I like your paper because I think it's really clearly written. Specifically, you focus on, you want to examine the mechanisms about the evolution of gossip, and you propose that there are two interconnected mechanisms. One is the reputation dissemination function, and the other is the selfishness deterrence function. And these two should work together. If you bring out one, the whole link will be broken, right? When I think about this, I think I keep thinking about this simulation or this agent-based modeling environment. You mentioned that you have done several robustness checks regarding the environmental factors, but I also think about the importance of some structural factors, which are related to the previous question specifically. One is that there is a very basic assumption. You assume that all information flows through inter-agent interaction, right? So the reputation information flows from inter-agent interaction. But there are another important structural factor, that is people's information, the information flowing through the inter-agent interaction sometimes can be less correct. You mentioned about the misinformation, but that's not something I want to capture. I just mentioned, I just want to say that some information is not intentionally disseminating to be incorrect. But some information that the agents get may not be that correct. So they disseminate it. But there are some outside information can correct that form, right? So there are certain proportion of information flowing through this inter-agent network. There are some proportion may not be that correct, but can be corrected by some outside information. But how can that be built into this agent-based model? Because that's really realistic situation. So this is the first one. And related to that one, I'm thinking about, related to James' very early question about the simulation of the network, because that will relate to how the information flow through the network. That will so the network structure basically will also influence the flow of the information through the agents, right? So that's why you mentioned that, okay, even though the proportion of the initial number of gossipers may not be that important, but the structure of the network may be more important because that impacts the information flow network. So these are the structural factors I think will influence to some extent the result. And also there's another important factor that is you did not mention here, but I was thinking that will there be in reality, will there be some agents in the real world that are so determined to not be gossipers? So no matter what functions, even though there are the two functions work, but there are certain amount of gossipers, of people, agents that are determined not to be influenced and not to want to be and want to maintain as non-gossipers. Yeah. If there is this fraction of agents in the model, will that change the result as well? And lastly, because all are related to the agent-based modeling. Lastly is about why these two functions work together to show the evolution and you can see that the number of gossipers actually increased, right? I think one of the important factor here is because in the model you assume that there is only advantages of spreading gossip, the reputation information. However, if we are the real gossipers in the real world, sometimes we may also be tagged as the gossiper. There are some negative consequences here, and that may deter people from being gossipers. And if we incorporate that factor, would that also change the whole funding? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm not sure whether I can remember. Oh, I'm sorry, but I will try to model. Yeah, I'll try to explain it here. So they first like misperceive the information, and then another information comes in to correct that. Actually, I have that. I'm not sure whether that's like is exactly what you wanted, but I somehow have this here. So this is a probability table. So you choose a hypothesis strategy from this table, but sometimes you may make a mistake here. So it's all probability. And if you make a mistake here, you may like tell other people something wrong. And they may take that information, but then like another people, they will say something completely different to you, and then you will further like any people will like further update this probability table. So the mistake in information, it just naturally happens, and it's all about probability. So I didn't implement those arrows like myself. They just like naturally happen in this process. So that answer your question about like how misinformation is corrected by later.
Considering the time, I will prefer not to
okay.
interact or to counter
okay.
much at this stage.
Yeah, and network. Yeah. So you mean I did try like different network structures, and network does influence like everything. Influence cooperation, influence information accuracy, and influence the prevalence of gossip. So I think I agree with you that it matters. But one thing that didn't change is that when you have both, the proportion of gossiper always increases. So that is a consistent result. But like the absolute value of everything will be changed by the network structure. And I only remember your fourth question about the cost of gossip. I actually did have that. So in another version of the model, I implemented cost of gossipers. So this can be cultural cost, or just the time and energy spent gossiping. And I found that as long as this cost is not that high, the gossipers will still evolve. But of course, when the cost is high enough, then not many gossipers. So it's more like a negative correlation. So I would say if you are in a culture like you would aware, like people really like value that you do not gossip, then of course there will be fewer gossipers. So that is a factor. Yeah, and the person, some people, they just decided they will never be the gossiper. So actually in the model, not everyone. So although the proportion, I don't remember, I think it's 93% in my baseline model. So, but all the populations, there will always be some people who never gossip. So I don't know, like whether they are like born to be like that, or just like they like eventually decided not to gossip. But I would say, so for the evolution approach, we actually didn't care like personal choice that much. But I would say like from a global level, there will always be some non-gossipers. Yeah, I agree with you about that. But like whether they're born to do that or they're learned to do that, that's what I cannot answer. Yeah. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you. One last question.
Thank you for your talk. And I have a general question about using the agent-based modeling to study social behaviors.
Yeah.
Could you please give us some advice on, I think it's a balance between the accuracy to model the real life and also parsimoniousness of the model.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it seems that agent-based modeling is a context-free method.
Mhm.
It doesn't care so much about the context, such
Yeah.
as gossip among adolescents or employees at workplace or online community.
Yeah.
So have you encountered any challenge during the review process?
Yeah.
Have they asked anything about external validity or how to model the context?
Yeah, quite a lot actually. So first, it will be hard to find a journal. Yeah, and my general advice is that your model should be based on a relatively established previous model, and you would hope that your reviewers all agree with that model. And so even for this, although you see the model is a bit complicated, but at the actual, so all my 6 strategies, I can found another version of like previous model, they use a similar strategy. So I can just set, and then I didn't create this strategy from scratch. I just modified it a little bit to make it fit my research question. And the brain part is what I implement to the model, but the whole like structure behind like gossip and cooperation and gossip is a dissemination of reputation. So all these things, I can cite previous literature. And I was lucky that the reviewers all liked those previous literature, so they didn't question this. They just asked me, like, why did I make that adjustment? And I said that, oh, I think it makes sense, I list reasons. And I like also tried the versions that they like. So even if I didn't do that, so that's why I have the like 40 pages of robustness test. So they didn't say, what if this, what if that? And say, I will show you like all the possibilities, and yeah, the conclusions are like generally the same, so it's not what you are, what you're worried about. But I can also like tell you that sometimes in your field there are just like 2 major frameworks. They are on the same, like they use the same term, but very like different base model. And if you are unfortunate, your reviewer will be those who like another version, and they would question you, why didn't you use that one? And the thing is that they read the model you cite, but they didn't select that model in the first place, and they asked you to solve the problems that people cannot solve in the past 30 years. And then, and that's what happened. So I think if you, and the suggestion is that in your title, and the reason why I encountered those reviewers was because that paper had been so long, so I changed the title and the wording for so many times, so I forgot where I started. Like, like I cited so many different literature, and all the terms were somehow like mixed, and so. And the editor may think that, oh, maybe I am in their branch, so they send it to another reviewer. So my general feeling is that in your like title particularly, and also your introduction, you must be very careful about only cite the literature that is consistent with your like baseline model. Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess we can start the online
Okay.
meeting first, and then we can see for.
Okay, all right, yeah. So I see a very heated discussion. So maybe we'll stop the online broadcasting first, and if the offline audience still have questions, we can have one more or 2 questions.